Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, kick goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
My guest today is Bill Ottman. He's the co-creator and CEO of Minds, an alternative social media platform based on the blockchain that actively rewards users for their contributions, supports freedom of expression, and unlike many competing platforms, is not incentivized to polarize people for the sake of driving higher user engagement. The platform has several million users and is growing fast on the back of a $10 million capital injection in 2021 and growing dissatisfaction with traditional social media platforms. In this conversation, we discussed 1. The myriad ways social media is broken, 2. What makes Minds different, 3. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression, 4. How censorship and deplatforming can backfire, 5. Why open source systems are better for humanity. 6. How Minds rewards users for their attention and contributions. 7. How Minds' business model differs from Twitter's. 8. The challenge of overcoming the network effects advantage other platforms like Twitter and Facebook already have. And 9. The inevitability of interoperable social media platforms. We discussed this and a whole bunch more. We went down numerous rabbit holes, so strap yourself in for a fascinating conversation with Bill Ottman of Minds. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
We just had a quick conversation about your time over at South by Southwest. Now you were in Austin to appear on the Joe Rogan Experience. You are obviously on there to talk all about Minds and alternative social media, which is a topic we'll be deep diving into today. But before we get into that, I just love for our audience to learn a little bit more about who Bill Ottman is. What did you do before Minds and how did you get into crypto?
You know, before Minds to me is almost non-existent because I went to UVM in Vermont for university, and you know in its original incarnation we were doing these events, actually these live forums / music festivals called Gathering of the Minds. And we would, kind of do them on different topics. We did some in like City Hall parks. We did some up at university, and we would bring together kind of all different groups and people to have debates around certain topics. We did like one about the university's stock portfolio, and we were like analyzing it and understanding, different divestments and investments and kind of getting the student body to analyze it and give feedback. And we found all these weapons manufacturers in the stock portfolio. And, this is very common among universities to kind of have these diversified portfolios with all kinds of like odd investments. But then we would do music after, and it was all about just like bringing people together for, open dialogue. And this was almost like, Facebook was barely a thing. This was like, 2005, 2006. And we did these for a number of years, and they were great. Like we actually did successfully get the university to divest from some crazy companies. And so that was cool. But then, some of them were more just about art and culture. And I also was a marketing director at the Gathering of the Vibes Music Festival, which is a big music festival in Connecticut, gets about 30,000 people for a few days, like James Brown, funk bands, Grateful Dead type bands, all that kind of stuff. And so I've always loved bringing people together. And so I sort of was a little bit anti-tech in a weird way in college. I was, up in the mountains, a little crunchy, a little bit, just kind of going down a certain path. And then I was seeing the effect that Facebook was having on people. and I was just like, this is gross. Like, I don't like the posturing. I don't like the addiction. It was just weird to me. But I inevitably somehow found my way into like open source and like, oh, there's a difference between browsers that, are transparent with you and, are more privacy focused versus like, Chrome and Microsoft and, just this sort of division between more ethical technology and, big tech kind of surveillance technology. And like understanding that divide, understanding that even existed. I just didn't even know it existed. And I was big into like local food, organic food, like transparency. And then I started to see, oh, you've kind of got like big food versus like local organic food. And then you've got like big tech versus, more, privacy preserving, like digital rights focused tech. And so I saw the divide, and that really is what got me fascinated by it. And just much more so understanding the internet as almost this extension of nature, an extension of like humanity. It's like the tool that the humanity uses to communicate with itself and understand itself and, share all of our information. So that's obviously a beautiful and fascinating thing. So that's where it happened. That's where it started. And then I realized, okay, we need to really digitize these physical events that we're having and kind of try to bring it to the web. And that's where it started.
Fantastic. And it sounds like everything you are doing with that sort of gathering of the minds and bringing people together to support open dialogue, like those principles are something that underpins what you're doing at Minds. And you're absolutely right. A tool is only as good as how you use it. And it's the same with software and the internet. Like it can be used for good and it can be used to hijack our attention and make us addicted to our phones. And speaking of which, like on being anti-tech, like just before this call, I just had a quick brain dump of things that are broken with social media. I came up with 10 quick ones. So like ad-driven and attention hijacking, number 1. 2, forcing human beings to have shorter attention spans and being addicted to their phones. 3, distracted people, sacrificing the collective genius of the world, essentially. Because if we're checking our phones every 5 minutes, we're not spending any time in deep work, doing great work. 4, teenagers constantly comparing themselves, depression rates higher, suicide rates higher. 5, political polarization. 6, doesn't help us think better. 7, intrudes on our privacy. 8, uses these privacy intrusions to influence the political process. 9, cancels dissenting voices. And 10, it's closed source. There's no transparency or clarity around how algorithms work. Have I missed anything, Bill?
I love it. That was that was an amazing amalgamation of all the problems. And that's cool that, we sort of coalesced on similar things before you even read me that list. So, that's it. That's it. And there might be a couple things not there, but it's a long list of problems. But I think that, look, like it's just we see kind of better solutions eating, now there's this phrase, even, big venture firms like Andreessen Horowitz are kind of putting out decks talking about how open source is eating software. It used to be that software is eating the world. Yeah. That was kind of their original, motto, which is so true. But now it's open source is eating software. And so we're sort of in that phase. And then, it's kind of coupled with like crypto kind of infusing itself into the open source, because crypto is sort of like an overlay on open source, because there is closed source crypto projects, which, like Meta, for instance, would be an example of sort of a distortion of the philosophy of the true philosophy of crypto.
Yeah, definitely. And just on that, so I read you that list. Now, for the uninitiated, what is Minds and how is it different to, say, traditional closed source social media like Facebook or Twitter?
I mean, for that whole list, I would just say, like, try to invert it. And what would be, sort of like, we take that list essentially, and we have a different way of approaching that problem than big tech apps are. So, They're closed source. We're open source. They have full access to all of your messages and communications. We are end-to-end encrypted, so we can't even access your messages. We don't want to access your messages. We don't want your personal information. In terms of, stuff with like the addiction and mental health, I think that a lot of that has to do with education, and because, the internet is an insane place, and you can't necessarily stop people from having access to really nasty content or like judging themselves against their friends. A lot of that does have to do with like education at home, parental supervision, really trying to help foster understanding how to. Oh, sorry, my daughter actually just got attacked by a dog.
Oh wow.
Her neighbor's dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's going to the doctor right now. So
she was actually bitten.
She just walked through. Yeah, she was just bitten, and it was not. Our neighbor actually just moved in, and it just happened. So anyway, little side tangent. Yeah.
Hopefully there's no longer term repercussions where she's scared of dogs when she gets older and whatnot. But I hope she's okay.
Yes, thank you. So I guess learning how to consume the insanity that is social media in a way that we don't let it trigger us and kind of negatively impact our psychological state. That's a very challenging thing to learn how to do, because everyone on Twitter is just trying to slam each other. It's tribe versus tribe. You're trying to think of the witty way to own somebody or, show how someone's stupid. And it's like, okay, fine. Like to a certain degree, you're never going to avoid that. But I think that the lens that we are viewing social media through does matter. Like, we've put kind of UI enhancements in where like at the top of your newsfeed, when you first sign up, it says build your own algorithm. And you can actually adjust the slider to say like, I want to see more ideas that I disagree with, or I want to see less ideas that I disagree with. So understanding like, what is your tolerance for ideas that are different from your own? What is your tolerance for, legitimately crazy ideas? And people should have control over that, not just like these sketchy algorithms that are kind of playing us for the lowest common denominator of our nature. And, that's the malicious part. Some people would be like, well, why do I care if, I have access to the source code? Like, I'm not a technologist. I'm not a coder. Like, what does it have to do with me?
Yeah.
What it has to, it's not that you'll inspect it. It's that, the community will, and they will sort of decide if there is malicious activity in the algorithms, and if it, like, how are we being targeted? Is it sketchy? Is it not? Because there's good algorithms. I mean, there's algorithms that can surface really amazing stuff. It's not that like saying algorithms are bad is sort of like saying math is bad. Like you can't, it's all about control and like, what is it doing?
Yeah, exactly. And from what I understand with Minds, you guys show tweets, or rather posts, in reverse chronological order, right? So it's not just appealing to your lowest base emotions like anger and fear and whatnot to essentially engage you and keep you hooked on the platform. It's reverse chronological order. And of course, you can influence that by toggling things on and off when you first sign up to the platform or thereafter as well. So that's like a UI decision you guys have consciously made so that it's not just trying to hit up that, or it's not just trying to boost that KPI around user engagement, which is the number one thing that every other social media platform tries to optimize.
Exactly. I think that the kind of reverse chronological by default, default settings matter so much. And, it was so horrendous when Facebook really started in like changing the default settings and reducing people's organic reach. This happened to us. Like we don't really post on our Facebook page anymore, but like back in the day, we used to drive a lot of traffic to Minds. from Facebook and would get like a lot of reach. And basically, even with hundreds, thousands, millions of followers on Facebook now, you're reaching like 2% of your audience organically. Yeah. And so they basically roped in the whole internet and said, hey, like, here's this communication platform. People subscribe to you, and then, you can post stuff and they'll get it. So that basic social contract was broken. Like that's what social media is. It's I subscribe to you, you post, I get your stuff. Mm-hmm. But if that is broken, it's like, what is this? Like, I don't need Facebook in the middle of that relationship. I just want to consume content that I subscribe to. If I don't like it, I'll unsubscribe from it. And people put like a decade or decades of their lives into building these followings. And then to have that stripped away, it's like, that is just a total betrayal. And now all of the apps are doing it. And, they're not having this reverse chronological by default. So, again, algorithm's fine if you want to toggle it to like be like a top feed or like some sort of, based on your engagement, like that's fine. Like you can still find cool stuff in that way. But it shouldn't be default, because the default is really that basic social contract.
Yeah. And totally relate to building a company account or a group on Facebook only for like 2 to 5% of people in that who have liked that company account to see the post. So it's kind of like, well, what's the point of even investing all of this time and energy building up this following on Facebook? And I think Jack Dorsey, since he left Twitter, he's been obviously a lot more vocal nowadays. And he did post something about how, the days of Usenet and IRC and, that was amazing because the way you discovered things was very different to the way it is now, where it's more or less, this centralized discovery. And he blames himself partially for that. But the nature of how we discover, whether it's music, whether it's intellectuals, whether it's ideas, it's very much different on these platforms like Twitter and Facebook than what it used to be in the Wild West days of Web 1.0.
Right. Yeah, I saw that post, and it's frustrating. I'm glad to see that he's acknowledging it. Acknowledging is kind of the first step.
Yeah.
But
12-step program.
Yeah, I don't trust though that like he's just becoming aware of this. Like I feel like he's known this for a really long time. I mean, even when he first started getting into Bitcoin and kind of first started talking about the Blue Sky project at Twitter, where they were apparently like looking into open source decentralized social media, and he didn't change anything at Twitter. He didn't say anything about any of this. And, no change was enacted there. So it's sort of like, oh, well, thanks for telling us that, you're admitting fault like a couple months after leaving, when you could have actually had some influence. And like, look, I do think that Twitter is still interested in some of this stuff. I mean, interoperable decentralized social networking is just where we're going. So they can't really avoid it. And that's why we're seeing them get involved with NFTs. And, we're seeing Instagram getting involved with NFTs. And so, decentralized identity, verifiable credentials, NFTs, crypto wallets, like all of this is going to become pervasive in all social networks over, the nenext few years. So that's good.
Yeah.
But, when it comes to what Elon Musk was tweeting about, how, he said the words open source algorithms. Well, like when I saw that, I was like, yes, like finally someone, like the best person who could have said it, because I sort of feel like the censorship conversation is like a hot topic always, but like rarely do people bring up the algorithms and like how it needs to be open source. Like the way that you solve it is auditing the algorithms. Like you don't solve it any other way. So that's huge. And it's just so fascinating to see what is going on with the dynamics of Elon, like taking a stake and, Dorsey having left. And it's just, it'll be fascinating to see what happens over the next few weeks. And, if a hostile takeover actually does happen, he decided not to join the board. You have to wonder about the politics, like behind the scenes of, why.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why would you invest in buying like a 9.2% stake in Twitter only to not take a board seat where you can have that influence and have the ear of the board and everything else? I mean, I think he still will have the ear of the board, but it is, it does make you wonder why. And is this just preempting a hostile takeover or something of that effect? I guess we'll wait and see on that one. But to your point about Jack Dorsey, so, back in the early days of Twitter, they did consider themselves, the free speech wing of the free speech party. And that obviously changed over time as the organization got bigger and bigger. And just curious what your thoughts are about whether or not Jack was just kind of, the company became bigger than him and he couldn't actually make these changes himself because he was part of this bigger machine, and there's a lot of other dissenting voices, and it was part of a big cultural movement and he could only do so much.
I think that is undoubtedly true, that he lost control.
Yeah.
And that, he didn't want to step on people's toes. He didn't want to, hurt his own company. But at the same time, I feel like that's not an excuse. Like, if you actually care about the company, then you should be the CEO who steps up and, says that, look, we're not gonna get political. We're going to try to, free speech works. Like, we have centuries of data in, American society to prove that, free speech is a good idea and creates healthy societies. Twitter has this new sort of definition of healthy. And it's just what I'm sort of challenging big tech on now is because, so we wrote this whole paper called The Censorship Effect, which is, 80 pages of studies and some custom research that we did showing how censorship causes increased radicalization, polarization, isolation, depression, and the list goes on. And we worked with multiple PhDs. Many researchers came in and kind of helped create an empirical artifact so that it's not an emotional argument when we're talking about, I believe in free speech. Why? Because it works, because it is better long term. And I'm challenging big tech to show us, where is your research? Where are the studies that show that these deplatforming policies actually work? Because from what I can tell in the articles that say, censorship works and that, certain speech causes real world harm, there are isolated instances of this, but largely there's very little peer-reviewed research on it, like that actually proves that deplatforming long-term helps. And, you can think about this in a very simple way. You ban someone, you're never changing their mind. Like, there's no chance at that person ever de-radicalizing. If you you just cut them off. So, what we're saying is that our rate of de-radicalization, or not just our rate, any kind of free and open network, the rate of de-radicalization will have to be higher because they're there to communicate with.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a matter of physics. Like, if I can communicate with someone, then I have a better chance at, them potentially evolving their thought processes.
No, absolutely. And I did dive into some of the papers on censorship and de-radicalization and everything else. And, there are some papers out there that purport to say that deplatforming people helps to detoxify social media. However, part of that to me looks like it's detoxifying. It might be detoxifying Twitter, but then it goes underground. And then other things that I've read suggest that it becomes a lot harder then to have conversations, to identify what people are talking about, to enforce the law and everything else that comes with that, because you're forcing nefarious actors to go underground and you can't see what they're doing, what they're talking about, who they are, or anything of that sort. So I'm sure you've kind of gone very deep on this stuff.
The fact that, you just brought up the key point. It's like, how are we defining works when we talk about, does censorship work? If you're talking about an isolated network, can you detoxify or limit the use of certain language and, limit the conversation around certain topics on an isolated network? Well, of course you can. that's so obvious. Like yes, you can stamp it out. You can, program your AI to find it and delete it. But that is such a shallow notion of, what is effective. And what that mentality is very much like, I only care about my house and, this network. I don't care about the internet. Like, when we approach this question, it's like, the internet is the network.
Yeah.
It's not Facebook or Google or Twitter. Like, we should all care about the internet. The internet is like the true network that represents humanity. It's not just, it's kind of, I was on a conversation earlier today, and it's sort of like you're in an apartment complex and, you're cleaning your house and you have this like huge pile of crap that you just like gathered, and you literally just throw it into the hallway.
Yeah.
You just throw it in, and it's just like, yeah, it's not my problem anymore. Just, you guys deal with it. It's gonna, float over into your house. And it is a very, very apt analogy. And also the radicalization that occurs online that actually escalates into violent extremism is actually far less than that which occurs offline. So what we know is that, like, yes, people, can have radical views online, but if they're communicating online and like involved in discourse, that's good. We want people, even if they have horrible ideas, communicating online. That means other people have access to them. That means there is a shot at them changing. If they go offline, and, because the real terrorists, the real violent extremists, they know that they should not be communicating online. They're going and having physical conversations and planning like really dark activity. So if people, it's a weird way to think about it, but if you see some nasty stuff on the internet in a strange way, it's sort of good that that's happening. It means that they're, venting their ideas. It's a social ventilation system for like stress and anxiety of culture. So, there is a different lens to look at it. And that's what Daryl does. Daryl Davis, who we partner with on this, who, famously de-radicalized hundreds of members of the KKK, neo-Nazis, you name it. And, he just befriends these people and listens to them. And that is hard for people to accept, because that is that's a radical thing to do in a sense. But, showing humanity to people who don't necessarily deserve it, I mean, it's counterintuitive, but that is actually sort of the way psychology works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of this stuff, Bill, is like very much symptomatic of the way things are today, where we're only thinking about things in terms of first order of consequence. Oh, Trump's being an asshole on Twitter. Let's get rid of him. Okay, well, what does that mean then? Like, what are the subsequent orders of consequence? Well, that just radicalizes people who are Trump voters, and it makes them harden themselves to their pre-existing beliefs, doesn't open them to discourse and conversations with people on the left. And then does that just set a really dangerous precedent where we can just willy-nilly ban representatives of state whenever we want to? Like, what kind of a world does that make sense? And it doesn't seem to be setting us up for positive long-term outcomes. But it's like, oh, well, this person said this, so let's just ban them. So I guess to that point around de-radicalization, open conversations, free exchange of ideas, which is what Minds is all about. Do you guys have any sort of processes in place to kind of track or gather evidence around how Minds might actually be changing people's minds, essentially?
Yeah. So in the Build Your Algorithm tool, it's sort of like a survey widget where you can kind of adjust these sliders. And so the data in those sliders is actually quite important, because it's sort of, you can express some of your political views. You can, adjust your tolerance to controversial ideas. so tracking the adjustment of those settings over time, I think, is definitely a way to understand, if people are kind of opening up and, being more willing to hear from ideas that are different from their own, or changing their sort of position on the political compass. That's really important. And
are you finding people are changing those toggles over time?
We, generally we have a high rate, from the get-go of people being open to kind of a wide variety of opinions, just by the nature of how people are hearing about us. And to be honest, I don't have, we just rolled it out like a little over a month ago. So I don't have data to report, but we will be reporting like regularly on the progress. And that's just one form. Like there's also more of a, case by case, like we're going to be, with Daryl, like building a team and like a group of volunteers who are actually like manually going around, and like, cause Daryl's work is very manual. Like he'll have a, white supremacist, black supremacist, like neo-Nazi reach out to him. He'll engage in dialogue, and it's a long-term thing. So we do have those conversations that are going on. So we'll be tracking those over time and trying to, get that number, make number go up. And then, but it's not all just about like super extreme ideology. I think that the crazy thing is that things are so polarized right now that literally like Hillary supporters or Biden supporters and like think that Trump supporters are terrorists, and Trump supporters think that Biden supporters, like they literally think they're terrorists. Like that's not even a joke. So, I mean, that's just the status quo. Like literally mainstream political parties are calling each other terrorists. So that's shocking. And I think that even if we can find change within that area of the spectrum, not like hardcore racists and, Al-Qaeda propagandists like that. Yes, that's an important area to put energy, but also just like normal people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's quite evident both obviously in the United States, but here in Australia too. I think over time, if you look at the data, people have become a lot more polarized across the left-leaning and the right-leaning political parties here in Australia. And I think a lot of that is social media and fringe ideas being shoved in our face at the detriment of the silent majority in the middle, who then slowly but surely over time end up falling into one of these two sort of extreme camps by virtue of it just being everything they see. And then over time pervades the workplace as well. Like we're seeing a lot of these sort of fringe ideas pervading sort of human resources. And I know from my conversations with people who work in big corporate, in startups and things of that persuasion, 9 out of 10 people that I know just say, look, I don't agree with all of these fringe ideas. A lot of them around, DEI and things of that persuasion, but I dare not speak up for fear of reprisals or compromising my ability to get promoted or whatever the case is, or losing my job even. So it's very scary. But just moving on from freedom of speech, just in the interest of time, Bill, one other thing that perhaps doesn't get anywhere near as much attention is freedom of information. Because, and this could apply to a lot of things. I mean, obviously WikiLeaks is an example of that. Academic papers where you need to pay $30, $50, $100 to access some academic papers, some intellectual information that you can use to build upon, to stand on the shoulders of giants, solve problems, take new innovations to the world, yet we're not making that information freely available. And oftentimes the money for those papers goes to the publisher and not the actual people who wrote the papers. So I'm keen to unpack your thoughts on freedom of information, and also just considering some of the counter arguments, which could be that, hey, if I wrote this, I should be incentivized. Or in the case of WikiLeaks, well, if we just put all this information out in the open, is that going to create sort of, is that going to compromise our security to some degree?
Hey, I mean, you're speaking my language right now. I mean, freedom of information is the underdog that is honestly, to me, more of a foundational issue, even more so than freedom of speech, and it just doesn't get nearly enough credit. There's this one thing I wrote, which I don't know, maybe you've come across, but it's just this quick thing about freedom of information. So freedom of information doesn't get nearly as much attention as freedom of speech, but it's actually just as essential and far less polarizing. Who doesn't want the secrets declassified, which can then educate the public to the degree necessary to have informed speech? So, it's all about having being able to make informed decisions. And I mean, whether you're talking about proprietary software, surveillance technology, government secrets, corporate secrets, corruption, across companies or states. It's just like, we are not in a position to even have to express our freedom of speech if we don't have information to inform the speech that we're speaking. So yeah. That's why it's more of a first principles place to start. That's why I'm so obsessed with open source and open data. And I think that more people need to clue into it. And, freedom of information law reform is just absolutely critical. In the US, we have FOIA. I don't know what you guys do. Is there an equivalent to FOIA in Australia?
I'm not sure what FOIA stands for.
It's Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, there would be.
What was your question specifically?
Well, the question I was really just unpacking your views on freedom of information, which I think we definitely got to in terms of it being sort of the foundation upon which freedom of speech or informed freedom of speech essentially sits. And I think back to the original point, it does support discourse, but also supports more effective decision making, and that could run the gamut from conversations to business decision making and how I choose to invest my dollars. I mean, if you think about Google and Google ad revenue or Google ad sense over the past 15, 20 years, the algorithm's always changing, but nobody can see the algorithm, and therefore that impedes my ability to make good decisions when it comes to how I spend my marketing time and dollars. But if I knew how the algorithm worked, obviously I could tailor my SEO accordingly so that I can rank higher. But everybody has that information, so it's a level playing field. So that's essentially where we're at on that. But I feel like we should take a step back. We've kind of gone down the philosophical rabbit holes of freedom of speech and freedom of information and deplatforming and de-radicalization and all of this stuff. But I wanted to kind of double click a little bit more on Minds and what makes you guys fundamentally different. So one of the things I called out in that initial list was attention hijacking. And one thing we find, and I think the social dilemma really called this out, is that our attention is not being valued. In fact, our attention is being monetized by ad-driven business models. Whereas with Minds, you guys are a tokenized, decentralized, blockchain-based social media platform. You've got 250 million tokens in supply. Every day, you're rewarding users with about 10,000 tokens. For example, I posted something the other day. You were kind enough to remind it, which is essentially sharing it. And that then went off to earn about 1.5 to 2 Minds tokens, which, it's a couple of US dollars, which may not sound like much. But if I'm posting every day over the course of the year, I might make some, 5, 10K over the course of a year, whatever the case is, which compares to 0 on Instagram, 0 on Facebook, 0 on Twitter. So I'd love for you to kind of enlighten our audience a little bit more about your tokenomics and what you think about, whether it's a create to earn model or a use to earn model that you guys are building.
Yeah. So I do sort of feel like we're in a little bit of the play to earn space. I almost think of our app as a game sometimes. Mm-hmm. I like thinking about the internet as a game too. Buckminster Fuller had this whole concept of the world game, which is this idea of, sort of what is the fastest route to, make the world the best for the most number of people, and just gamifying that concept generally. Mm-hmm. in terms of game theory, like how do we get to that kind of best life for the maximum number of people the fastest? And yeah, I mean, we have been playing with reward systems and game theory for like 7 years now. We had like a centralized point system back in 2015 before you even like Ethereum was really around in like a usable sense for developers. But so you could earn points, and then 1 point was worth 1 view. So you could boost your post with the points that you earned. And people loved it. And it was like literally like a way out of this sort of algorithmic suppression happening on Facebook. You know, we just want, again, it's an example of that inversion. Like rather than like taking people's reach away, like we want to find every way to give people more reach. Yeah. But then our community was just like, you guys gotta tokenize it. Like we want control of our tokens. And we were just obviously totally in support of that. And so we migrated everybody's token balances to, you know, 1,000 points converted into 1 token. So now 1 token will get you 1,000 views on the network. And so those balances were all migrated, and we created a supply. It's actually, so it was originally 1 billion tokens, but then we ran the finish. We got rid of 750 million. Mm-hmm. And so now it's 250 million, and we ran the finish minting function. So we can't make any more.
Was that to make it more scarce, to make it deflationary? What was the thinking behind effectively burning 750 million?
Yeah, just to make it more scarce. And, you know, it was just a better number to work with. Mm-hmm. And so now we have 3 buckets of daily rewards. Back in the day, it was just engagement rewards, but now it's engagement, holding rewards, and liquidity rewards. So 40% of the daily 10,000 are going to engagement. That's for like getting upvotes and popular content, getting people to share your stuff. Then 10% is just for holding. So literally just for holding on chain in your crypto wallet, you're earning. And then for liquidity, half of the daily go to the liquidity rewards, which if you're staked into the Minds ETH pair on Uniswap, then that's what that is. And the cool thing that we're doing with that I think is pretty novel is that there's an advertising slot in the side of the main news feed, which we call it ad mining. It's essentially based on your share of the Minds ETH pool. That is going to equate the percentage of time that your channel shows up in that advertising slot. So if you have 1% of the Minds ETH liquidity pool, then you're going to show up in that slot 1% of the time. And that's just free advertising. Like we're not, and that's totally passive, happening in the background, correlated. Because part of the problem with the boosting your posts with on-chain tokens traditionally has just been that the gas fees are so high. So like, you know, if you want to spend like, you know, even like $20 on advertising, like, you know, the gas fee is going to be
$100 on gas fees.
You spend $100 on gas fees. So that doesn't, but now we have some layer 2 stuff coming out in the next few months. So that'll be exciting and hopefully help that problem a little bit. So we'll be able to do more individual boosting with on-chain. Yeah. We have the whole off-chain system, which is sort of like the evolution of our old system, so we drop the rewards every day off chain, and you can use them off chain, you can boost off chain, but then you can withdraw on chain anytime you want, and use them that way. So that's how we've gotten around the gas issues in the meantime. And yeah, I mean, look, it's been great. Like, I think that we're constantly kind of open to new reward mechanisms. Like we're looking at some really cool integrations with Gitcoin now, like looking at their Aqueduct program so we can get more rewards going to developers. And, you know, ultimately we just want to reward, you know, people who are helping us decentralize more, people who are helping us build, you know, content creators who are helping drive activity and bringing great content. So that's the whole purpose of the ecosystem. Yeah.
And to me, it sounds like the tokenomics model you guys have in place is kind of a substitute or maybe complements marketing in a way and gets people to join the platform, stay engaged with the platform, keep coming back, keep posting and so on. And just when I take a step back and think about other social media platforms, they kind of have their arms tied because their business model is driven by ad revenue and therefore they need to keep people engaged on the platform. Like with Minds, what are your main sources of income? So like I imagine you've got some form of subscription or advertising and things of that persuasion. And how do you think about that from the perspective of it being in conflict with optimizing people's experience on social media?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, our token in a sense represents like ownership of our ad space. Like we're sort of like, we've made the decision to kind of give our ad space to the community who earns it.
Right.
And
is that a percentage of ad revenue gets redistributed back, or is it just based on token ownership?
It's, well, you know, with the tokens, you can, you know, either get into the ad mining for that share of the ad space, or you can just use them to boost. So, you know, if you have a lot of tokens, you can boost more and kind of have more content in the ad inventory that we have. But yeah, so our main revenue comes from Minds Plus, which is like the premium subscription. And, you know, it's just much more sustainable to have membership based revenue. I think for any company, to be honest, recurring revenue is like where it's at for any company. So we don't want to be tempted to even like bring in sketchy advertising. So like we didn't want to build up our business to be focused on that. So Minds Plus is basically a rev share system, and we do have fiat monetization as well as crypto. So Minds Plus is mostly working on the fiat arms of things. We're trying to figure out how to do it with the token, but it's not quite there yet. So what Minds Plus is an exclusive feed that you only get access to if you have Minds Plus, with all different kinds of content in it. But the key part is that it gives you the ability to post into that feed. And if you post popular content in that feed, we're taking 25% of the revenue of Minds Plus and proportionally sharing it with the creators who post content into that feed. So the analogy would be like, imagine if Netflix let you upload films and, you know, gave you a payout at the end of the month if it performed well. That's what the product is. So it's a premium content subscription, but you get to create content and benefit if it does well. So I think that's a pretty exciting model, and people really are enjoying it. So, but yeah, we're kind of constantly looking for ways to improve the incentives and get more rewards to the people who really deserve it. So,
I think that's a really important point you just made, Bill, as well, just around actually rewarding people for the content they create. I mean, I've got some friends who spend hours a day on Instagram, posting stories, doing all this stuff. You know, they're in the biohacking space or they're in the fitness space and whatnot. And they've got huge audiences, 40, 50,000 people. They're bringing these audiences on there every day. But who benefits from that? Instagram. These guys benefit, but they have to benefit by creating courses and doing coaching and doing this stuff offline. And Instagram basically just becomes a customer acquisition channel for them. But they don't get a single dollar from creating all this content for Instagram. And I think that's just such a refreshing change to be moving to that world. But one question I do have, I mean, Instagram, Twitter, all these platforms, they've been around for a long time, and they have network effects. They have hundreds of millions of users. And network effects, for those who are uninitiated, essentially means that the value of a network or a platform increases based on how many users that network has. So how do you find, obviously it's a challenge with Minds versus, say, Twitter right now, because you want to post where all the people are. And Minds compared to Twitter is still a lot smaller. So how do you see those sort of getting beyond those hurdles that the network effects essentially present and coming to the party, say, 15 years after Twitter?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, the funny thing, it kind of depends on who you're talking to. Like for small to medium-sized content creators, you know, Minds can honestly yield more reach. There's a lot of people sort of screaming into a void on big tech. and like, they're addicted to it. They're posting all day. They're getting like 2 likes. I mean, there's even huge pages on like a place like Vice magazine. If you go to their Twitter, they've got like 5 million followers and they get like 10 likes on their posts.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of and this is common. Like there's a lot of big brands that don't get good engagement on big tech. And even if they have a huge audience. So with us, because like we have the boost mechanism and we have like a very kind of core community, you can get better reach in many cases than on big tech apps. Now, when you start to talk about like much bigger influencers who are getting like the majority of the engagement on big tech, that's when we do see, some of the bigger creators of Minds getting like, 1,000+ engagements on some posts. So that's like, starting to get into that level. But like, yeah, that's absolutely like the next phase is to, like, creators don't really understand that they do control the internet. And I think that even, top creators on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter just like haven't really realized this yet, like how much power they actually do have. And, that they can, if they have like a highly engaged audience, like that audience will move around. And, I know people are distracted. People have a million things going on. There's a million different apps to be on, but you need to have your own infrastructure and communication channels with your community so that, big tech can't strip that away from you. And we do have like cross posting features so that like tweets mirror to Minds and like YouTube videos mirror to Minds, so that getting your foot in the door, it is actually not that hard and it's not that much energy to like start to get some momentum going. Yeah. And there's those token rewards there, which make it more worth it. And you absolutely can be earning, competitively if you go hard. And I think that like YouTube is an example of an app that like does have a good revenue share system that works well. And I think that that's why that's a lot of the reason why major YouTubers love YouTube so much, obviously, because they make a killing. And, YouTube has figured out that system. So, but yeah, it's so odd that Instagram really doesn't and that Twitter really doesn't. I mean, how? Like Twitter literally, they just added in a tipping feature like in the last year. Like where have you? Yeah, it's kind of shocking. I don't understand. Google has the ad network, so that makes it a lot easier for them. And Facebook has started getting into some creator economy stuff, but that's all good news. Like, creators deserve to be making more money. And so I think that it's really dangerous for your brand to not diversify. That's the main thing that I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned cross-posting from YouTube, mirroring over to Minds. Have you started to have conversations with platforms like, say, Hootsuite and these different social media automation platforms where you can post across, say, 6 platforms at once? Are you guys starting to integrate into them?
Yeah, we have been talking to Buffer and Hootsuite, and we're going to get that going. A lot of it has to do with getting our, we have an API, but like in terms of like a well-documented, API where developers can, create little keys to, do custom apps and stuff. That is something that we're still working on. It's really, it is a David versus Goliath situation, like, because, like you say, they've kind of reached this network effect where, and they have thousands of developers and billions of dollars, and the momentum is just so massive. We're not going to see the same type of situation where like MySpace became obsolete and like literally nobody uses MySpace. I don't think that that's actually going to happen with kind of the next wave of social. I think what's going to happen is that they're all going to kind of be peer pressured, hopefully, by the crypto community is going to hit major network effects. We're going to have billions of crypto users. I think that that's pretty obvious. And so, the next phase is getting interoperability between the major networks. So, and we're seeing Twitter starting to look at this, and the fact that they're even integrating crypto wallets is a pretty big deal. But with like DID, decentralized identity, verifiable credentials, decentralized web nodes, and there's with NFT support, and then you're sort of like a portable being throughout all different social networks, and you have sovereignty over your assets, over your content, over your reputation and your money. And then I think it's going to be a lot easier for creators to kind of bounce around when you're not like leaving behind something that network owns. Like you own your social graph. And so that's where I hope that we can really help. I really want to help build that. We're not there yet, but we're definitely kind of ahead of big tech, that's for sure. So that's a place where we are ahead of them, and we have more adaptability to kind of go harder into the crypto and like incentive mechanisms and like reward systems. Like it takes them just so long to integrate. I mean, look, even Dorsey, who's like a hardcore Bitcoiner, could barely get anything into Twitter, and he left. And so we can only speculate that he got frustrated.
Yeah.
No,
and it sounds like, I mean, yes, the switching costs are high, but we are slowly but surely moving to an interoperable world across social media, across, the quote unquote, the metaverse. And I think that will make it easier for creators to not have to worry about, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But a thing that I think, rather than seeing this as David versus Goliath, I mean, it could be a question of David showing Goliath the way. And in your case, doing all these things, and then Twitter sees, wow, look at Minds doing with these tokenomics models and incentivization structures. And this seems to be really working.
Well, I can give you a little inside info. Like Reddit actually reached out to us.
There you go.
And they're bringing in this whole Ethereum system with tokens for the different communities. And so like they definitely are paying attention, and that's good news. I'm not like black and white. Like I do see value that Web 2 brought to, I mean, it's obvious. Like Web 2 did great things, but like we're moving past it. Like it was a necessary part of the evolution, but time to kind of put some of that behind us and move on. But they're clinging to a lot of the control, and I think that people should just don't give them only the minimal energy that you need to give them to achieve your goals. Like and make sure that you are using them and they are not using you. And like, because they will just like grab your, like, there's nothing more sad than just like someone being hopelessly addicted to like Instagram and just like having no control over themselves to check their feed. That's something, but that's something that transcends all social media. I mean, it's not like even Minds will necessarily solve that. That's like a very sort of introspective process we all need to go through to have that kind of control over our habits. But, having the conversation is the main thing. And like, you certainly don't see any big tech companies like pushing people to not use them as much, even though counterintuitively, that's what they would need to do to actually earn the respect and trust of the community, because it would be obvious that they actually did care about, their community's mental health, and that would probably help their businesses more long term. So it's like that counterintuitive, like sort of inversion that we really need to go after. And so I'm hopeful. I think that, ultimately I've been just so happy to see how Bitcoin and the crypto market has just been kind of hanging in there amid all of this global chaos recently. And I think it really is proving itself in like a profound way. So it's just amazing. And, I really love both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I just, I hope that we can get at, like, seeing the polarization within crypto really does kind of get at me sometimes. And it's just sad So I hope that conversation gets better. I hope that the kind of relations between Bitcoin and Ethereum improves, because they really are both beautiful systems. And I'm hopeful. I think people will learn.
I hope so. And I think, you do definitely see some of that tribalism emerging, especially, layer one layer one versus other layer one, Solana versus Avalanche versus Ethereum. Oh, but, Polygon and everything else. And then you have maxis and NFT maxis and this maxi and that maxi. And it's like, to some degree, nuance starts to become a victim again to some degree, but I'm hoping that won't be the case. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we've got war in Ukraine. We've got 7% inflation in the United States. We've got Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars. Like, what the hell is going on? Yet the crypto market seems to be doing well to hang in there, which I think speaks volumes about the community and everything going on. And I think what you said there about use the tool, don't let the tool use you, is a beautiful place to end this conversation, Bill. So really appreciate your time today. If people want to learn more about Minds, they can head over to minds.com. They can find the app in the App Store, Google Play, all those places. And if they want to connect with you, Bill, where's the best place to do that? Obviously on Minds. But where else?
That's my spot.
That's your spot.
I had to be consistent, and like really give it a go,
Yep.
So minds.com/Ottman. One last note on the, I think that Eric Voorhees, really, speaks eloquently about, when people get into this maximalist mindset with anything, whether it's a political issue or, a crypto project, it's like, ultimately, if you care about decentralization, you should want to see more projects innovating, more optionality. More optionality is more decentralization. And that I constantly see that argument working and resonating with everybody who's in the space. So I highly recommend using that. Thanks for having me, man. Really, really great conversation. And hope to keep it going.
Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Gliveski and on Instagram at @TheSteveGliveski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.
This has been a No Filter Media production.
Say what you want.